Hi, I'm Mel Spencer, and today I'm going to learn to be a farmer. I don't think I have ever planted anything more than a few carrots, and frankly, they didn't do very well. So I have a lot to learn about how to farm, and I think it's high time. A person ought to be able to at least raise a few vegetables and preferably also some animals to eat, but that's a matter of opinion. I eat animals, but not all of my friends do, I'll tell you that. So we're going to go to Virginia to a place called Polyface Farm, and we're going to talk to a farmer. And he's not just an ordinary farmer. He's somebody who really teaches other people how to do various things. And there are many movements now in farming. And one of them is called permaculture. So I want to learn a little bit about permaculture, and then everything else that an ordinary person should learn about, even if we do not expect to grow anything except begonias. Okay. So good morning, Joel Salatin.
Good morning, Meta. It's a delight to be with you.
It's a pleasure, and I'm really looking forward to this. I need your help. Set me straight, and I don't even know where we're going to start, because you tell me a little bit about polyculture. Polyface.
Yeah.
And then about, I believe you also try to get people to do homesteading. Is that right?
Yes, that is correct. I'm a huge believer in homesteading. That's kind of how we started back in the early 60s. I was just a little child, and mom and dad bought this place, and the dream was to farm commercially, but it was in such a degraded state with gullies and rocks and low fertility that it just didn't go early on. So we had a big garden and milked a couple of cows and basically fed ourselves. And so I call it a kind of a glorified homestead for the first 10 years. But then,
wait a minute, a homestead is something where you get free land if you stake a claim or something, isn't it?
Well, that was the Homestead Act that President Abraham Lincoln signed back in 1862 or 3, and it ended up essentially being a freebie for land grant colleges and railroads. But that's another story. That's another story. Like many government programs, they don't often accomplish exactly what they set out to do. But anyway, the idea is that you grow your own food. So on our farm at Polyface, we're the farm of many faces. Poly, of course, being the Greek prefix or the Latin prefix for many. So the many faces, and this includes the many faces of environments, open land, forest land, and water or riparian areas, as well as the many faces of the people on the land, the many faces of the enterprises. So we have beef, pork, beef, pigs, chicken, eggs, duck, lamb, rabbit, and we also sell lumber because we have a lot of woods. So we have a sawmill and we sell lumber as well as firewood. And we've been here now since 1961. And so I'm second generation, and I came back to the farm full time September 24, 1982. And we launched full time at that point, and we've never looked back. And and now we have about 22 of us earn a living here from the farm. It's not a backyard operation by any means. We have never bought a bag of chemical fertilizer. So when Putin invaded Ukraine, that didn't, and fertilizer jumped 400%, that didn't affect us at all. And so we do very large scale composting. We turn it with pigs. So we don't use petroleum and machinery to do the compost turning. We're in perennials primarily, and we direct market. So we direct market to, we have an on-farm store. We make deliveries once a month. We make deliveries to drop points in the city. We service some restaurants, a couple of markets, and we ship. We ship nationwide. We have a 24/7, 365 open door policy. Anyone can come from anywhere in the world at any time to see anything, anywhere unannounced. That's our
like at 3 a.m. You're going to have
yes,
people knocking on the door.
absolutely, absolutely. We tell people if you think we're doing something you don't like, come at 2 a.m., 3 a.m., whatever. Don't wake me up. But you're welcome to walk the fields and check us out. That's our commitment to transparency.
Wow, I'm a great believer in transparency, but that takes the cake.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
let me tell you where I have been with the only contact I've had with the issues of farming that you've already mentioned a little bit is that I do quite a bit of shows about global warming. So naturally, one of the big things that's being promoted as a way of reducing climate change is the notion of carbon farming, or permaculture would, I think, be part of that, even organic farming, but things where the idea is to reduce the emissions from agriculture into the atmosphere, and preferably even capture carbon out of the atmosphere and put it in the soil and sort of lock it up for a while. So I know a little bit about things like cover crops and no-till farming, and two or three rock dust. We've done quite a bit about the application of soil amendments, including rock dust from pulverized basalt and so on, the application of biochar, and even seaweed, elixirs of seaweed that do good things. So those are the only meeting points between my own explorations and what you've mentioned so far. So tell me where we need to go to amplify my wisdom.
Yeah, well, great. I love it. You're still totally inquisitive and learning, and that's fantastic. So let me just say you're on the right track with all of those basic elements. But if you look at nature, let me just at the outset say that 500 years ago, North America produced more food than it does today. That's the important thing to understand. 500 years ago, North America produced more food than it does today. Now, it wasn't eaten by people.
Oh.
We had up to 200 million bison. We had 2 million wolves, each of whom needed 20 pounds of meat a day per wolf. We had 200 million beavers that ate as much plant material as all the people in North America today. We had flocks of passenger pigeons. Audubon, John J. Audubon sat under a tree in, I think, Massachusetts in like 1820, and he recorded in his diary, he said, I couldn't see the sun for 3 days because the flock of passenger pigeons blocked out the sun for 3 days.
Oh, that makes me want to cry.
Absolutely it does. And so you have this tremendous abundance long before John Deere invented the plow, long before hybrid seeds, long before Cargill and the Chicago Board of Trade. And so when we look at that, I'm always interested in saying, well, okay, if that is how abundant things were, well, what was the template? What was the pattern? How did it work? And the first thing you note is that it ran on primarily perennials, not annuals. So for your listeners, you know what a difference between a perennial and an annual. And so an annual is something you have to plant with seed every year. Barley, wheat, corn, watermelon, squash. Okay, whereas a perennial has some way to stay where it is and continue to regrow every year. So grass or bulbed, tulips are perennials. They make a bulb and then they come back every year. Crocuses. Okay. So a perennial, a grapevine, a tree. All right. So nature Yes, there are annuals, obviously, in nature, but they're very few. There aren't very many. Nature revolves fundamentally around perennials. And the energy flow in perennials is into the ground, because a perennial can't depend on a big fat seed to replicate it. It has to somehow survive the winter, survive the drought, survive the flood. And as a result, it stores its energy in the roots rather than in a great big seed, like a walnut, or an acorn, or a barley, or a corn. And as a result, the perennial tends to suck uh, suck carbon more out of the atmosphere, put it into the ground, than the annual, which doesn't have to have an energy inventory it doesn't have to have a carbohydrate bank account under the soil, because it's going to make a seed that's going to get planted, whatever, jump on the hair of a deer and get transported, or a waddling possum, is going to strike that little burr seed and plant it somewhere. And so so the perennial has a totally different energy flow. And so our agricultural system, if we're going to use nature as a template, the first place to start is, how do we get more acreage in perennials, and how do we leverage those perennials in the food system? And that is why all antiquity cultures, the foundation of their nutrition was either the herbivore or seafood, because those were the two nutrient dense foods that could be grown without annuals, without tillage. Herbivores, of course, live on grass and leaves, and seafood lives in the ocean, and it doesn't need seeds either. Mm-hmm. And so this is why early on grain became a holy grail in agriculture, because grain was expensive to grow. It was difficult to maintain fertility, because it sucked fertility out of the ground instead of pumping fertility into the ground like perennials. And so grain was an extremely expensive thing throughout history to plant, to harvest, to keep the mice out of it, and to use it. And so that became the holy grail of agriculture. How do we grow grain, sustainably? And of course, with cheap energy and cheap transportation now, and mechanization, for the first time in human history, grain has become ubiquitous and cheap and easy to grow, but at the cost of our soils. Right now, every bushel of corn costs us at least a bushel of soil. And we know that there's a dead zone the size of Rhode Island in the Gulf of Mexico. That's a direct result of turning the Midwest from a perennial prairie into a monocrop annual of corn and soybeans. And so the place to start on this entire this whole carbon issue, is we start with leveraging and promoting and encouraging perennials and their proper function in the landscape, as opposed to artificial intelligence, genetically modified organism, Roundup ready soybeans, and all the other things that we're trying to concoct.
That is brilliant. That is absolutely a new angle for me. And I bet you've told a dozen people or 100 people, but I haven't heard it before. And I can see it. Now tell me though, is there any grain that's perennial?
Well, I mean, even perennials make, grass makes seeds, but they're extremely small. And they're not really worth harvesting. And so all of the grains that have been, genetically selected for grain production, are not perennials, because you can't have the energy flowing both ways. By Temple Grandin, the grand dame of animal behavior, talks about biology. It can put its energy in longevity. It can put its energy in duplication, reproduction. It can put its energy in its maintaining its immune system. And a plant and an animal have to balance kind of those three areas. And so, because a grain plant puts so much energy in this big fat seed up here, it necessarily cannot put energy into the soil for longevity. For longevity, it's putting everything. It's banking on that seed for its longevity, for its reproduction.
But the thing that occurred to me when you were, the immediate thing was, okay, let's switch just to perennials. But, the majority of people on the planet depend on carbohydrates from grain, rice or wheat. Bread is the main staple. If you're poor, at least you can hope you can find a piece of bread. But what are you going to do for people if you take away the grain? How could our population survive without the dependence on grains?
Well, again, I go back to the fact that 500 years ago, North America produced more food, more nutrition than it does today with all of our grain production. So how do we do that? So the key is to run livestock the way bison ran across the landscape, the way the wildebeest currently run in the Serengeti. And when you look at herbivore populations in nature, and there are a lot of llamas, alpacas, giraffes, zebras, wildebeest, caribou, a bison. Right? When you look at herbivores in nature, they exhibit three things. They're moving, they're mobbed up for predator protection, and they're mowing. They're not eating whatever seeds, carrion, that sort of thing. They're moving, mobbing, mowing. And when you duplicate that on a domestic scale, your production goes up. So on our farm, let me just get to this point. On our farm, in 60 years, we have moved, because this whole conversation started with climate change and carbon sequestration. And so on our farm, in 60 years, with this modeling, we have gone from 1% organic matter in our soils to now a little more than 8% organic matter in our soils. And as you know, organic matter it's not completely carbon, but it's the number one tracker. If you want to track carbon in the soil, you're tracking organic matter. Okay, that's because that's material that was living and is now decomposing in the soil. And so we've gone from 1% to 8% organic matter, in 60 years. In fact, if we simply nationwide, if we simply moved our soils a little less than 2% organic matter, we would return to pre-1960 atmospheric carbon levels. If we only went, now I say on our farm, we've gone 7 percentage points in organic matter. But if nationwide, we simply, on our farmland, if we simply increased 2%, we would sequester the carbon in the atmosphere that would return us to pre-1960 atmospheric carbon levels.
That is wonderful. That is really, really an interesting figure. Okay.
Sure. Yeah, it sure is. And so the point is that we are that over the last whatever 100 years of industrialization and monocropping, and I'm not saying we should eliminate corn, but I'm talking about balance. I'm talking about the amount of it. That if we went to a more perennial basis and therefore a carbon sequestration basis, we would start sucking this carbon out of the atmosphere. The problem is we have cannibalized that carbon in the soil and let it go into the atmosphere. Mm-hmm. And so it's time to reverse that.
Okay, good. That you're telling me really interesting things that I'm very glad to hear, because for 2 or 3 years I have been a secret believer in Alan Savory's holistic management approach, where, and you've already alluded to the notion that herds of animals moving in a certain way across a territory, it makes a difference in the way the soil is fertilized and so on. So I'm glad to hear that. But I'm troubled. Let's go back to the question of feeding people, and whether, because we have this huge global population now that depends on various kinds of grain. If you took that away and you said, well, let's go back to these grasses, which, as I understand, the grasses that used to grow in the Midwest had sometimes roots about 6 or 8 feet long. Yeah. So they were much better than any grass that is there now. So I can see that you could sequester a lot more carbon with that kind of grass, and you could feed large herds of big herbivores. But could you produce enough herbivores and enough meat that people then could get along just eating, making up the deficit of their grain, their bread and their rice and that sort of thing, by eating more meat? I frankly don't think so. I don't.
Okay. Yeah. All right. So yeah, let's tackle that for a moment. Okay. Let's tackle that for a moment. So on our farm in our county, the average cow day. So a cow day is what one person would eat in a day. If I took all the food that you ate today, that would be one person day of food. Okay. So what a cow eats in a day is one cow day of food. All right. Mm-hmm. And so in our county, the average is 80 cow days per acre. In other words, an acre will feed 80 cows for one day a year, or one cow for 80 days a year. All right. Mm-hmm. Okay. On our farm, we average nearly 400 cow days per acre, nearly 400. We haven't planted a seed or bought a bag of chemical fertilizer in 60 years.
Wow.
So the productive capacity right now is so unbelievably underutilized that it scarcely is it's unspeakable how little, because of overgrazing, because of a lack of management. And of course, this is Alan Savory's entire, a brand or part of it, not entire, but a lot of it is, it is not the resource, it is the management of the resource that has changed. And when I said moving, mobbing, and mowing, the fact is that 98% of the domestic livestock on the earth violates one of those principles: moving, mobbing, or they're either not moving, they're overgrazing, they're not mowing in a feedlot for sure, or a confinement facility or a dairy confinement facility. And they're not mobbed up. They're spread, they're a few animals on a great big large acreage. They're not mobbed up. And so 98% of the domestic livestock on the planet violate one of those three principles: moving, mobbing, or mowing. And if you violate just one, then suddenly all of the ecological synergy that is supposed to occur because of that strategic moving, mobbing, and mowing doesn't occur. And when that doesn't occur, you don't get the grass production like there used to be in the migratory, in the moving, mobbing, and mowing. And most livestock violates not just one, but all three of those elements. And so the productive capacity is extremely undeveloped right now, worldwide. Secondly, for the first time in human history, we throw away about 40% of all human edible food. It's either blemished, it's too long, too short, too fat, thin, too sell by dates. Maybe it got tainted, maybe it got chemical poisoned, whatever. But humans have never in the past thrown away that much food. Yeah. So I mean, if you think about 40% of the human edible food on the planet being thrown away, and at least in previous historical times, that's why omnivores, pigs and chickens, omnivores were always up around a farmstead, homestead, place, because grain was too expensive to feed an omnivore, and so the omnivores fed on food waste, whether it was whey left over from cheese making in a dairy, or whether it was tomato peelings or vineyard pulp pumice from wine making. The point is that animals consumed all this. Today we have segregated these historical integrations, and instead of having integrated circles of waste and salvage, we have segregated these. And so even these salvage streams from food processing are no longer eaten by our herbivores. So when you combine what can happen with moving, mobbing, mowing across the landscape with herbivores, with an integrated culinary salvage, I mean, look, every single kitchen should have chickens nearby, whether it's a restaurant or a university dining services, should have enough chickens to eat the kitchen scraps so that the chickens can turn the kitchen scraps into eggs. That's an ultimate integration device. Yeah. But instead we take the kitchen scraps, send them out to the landfill or maybe a composting operation, and then we buy factory eggs from a factory farm in Iowa that's fed grain in a monoculture, segregated from the chickens, that's fertilized with fertilizer from Russia. Okay, so you have an extremely segregated, disconnected food and farm system, rather than a highly integrated, relational, synergistic system. And so feeding the world is not about, well, what are we going to do if we don't produce as much wheat? Feeding the world is about reintegrating and redesigning the not only the management, but the synergistic relationships that reduced wastage and actually leveraged the entire production component into human food.
Well, I love what you're saying. Now, but I have to refer to things that I've heard in other places that I need to reconcile with what you're saying. So sure. Let me give you a hard time.
Okay.
I certainly am inclined to agree with you. We did an interview with a woman who's with the White Oaks farm in Georgia, I believe it is, where they claim that they actually can prove that they are it's a meat packing operation primarily. They raise cattle and they pack it and they send it from their home base and so on. But they claim that they can show that they are adding more, that they're taking more carbon out of the atmosphere and sequestering it than their cows are producing. Now, that is the real question, because most of my vegetarian or vegan friends, and there are more vegans nowadays than vegetarians, I guess, they all are claiming that that there's just no way that you can actually farm in such a way that you will be putting away more carbon than your cows emit if you're a rancher producing meat. Sure. I don't know whether they take the same position vis-a-vis dairy cows. I don't think I've had that conversation, but it's mostly about beef. And right. And I actually talked to a woman, but she admitted that she wasn't an expert. But as of a few weeks ago, I throw this question at people every time I have a chance, if they are supposed to know a little bit about the subject. You know, is it because I'm in favor of promoting and encouraging holistic management as a food production system on a large scale, rather than telling people they have to stop eating meat. And I asked her, is it really possible, you think, to farm, to produce all the meat that everybody wants, if we all did our best to consume it? Is it possible to do that and still sequester carbon more than we are actually emitting? And she didn't think so. So right. she thought the evidence was the other way. Well, prove to me, please, I want to hear it, that she's wrong.
Yeah. So I can't give you, I know White Oak Pastures, the farm you've talked about, has collaborated with some scientists and stuff to do the actual testing on their farm. We have not done that here on our farm. We're open to it. We just haven't done it. But let me try a couple of ideas here. One is, let's take methane, for example. Methane, as Alan Savory says, methane. Okay, so methane, comes out of the cow as part of the digestive process, and there is it's called a methanotrophic. So a methanotrophic bacteria in the soil that is active under perennials. The methanotrophic bacteria does not survive under annuals, under tillage, under obviously parking lots and pavement and feedlots. It only actually thrives in healthy perennial pastures. And there's enough methanotrophic bacteria to suck down the methane generated by 1,000 cows per acre. Now, nobody's going to put 1,000 cows on an acre. So the point is that methanotrophic bacteria does indeed counter all of the methane generation that a cow will produce, but only if the cow is on well-managed perennial pasture and not overgrazed pasture, not corn in a feedlot, not in so many of these other areas. And so the problem is that the scientific community takes data points from the orthodoxy. The scientific community, if they're going to study cows, they don't go to the fringes like me. This is what's exciting about the White Oak Pastures study, is that they're a bit on that fringe, and lo and behold, what they've found proves the entire orthodoxy wrong. But most of the scientists that do cowspiracy and What the Health and the other documentaries and data points to impugn livestock production are taking their data from orthodox sources And I hope by now you understand that 98% of the livestock production is incorrect ecologically. That's the problem. It's incorrect ecologically. And so when you take your data from a dysfunctional system, if you have a model that's a dysfunctional, and that's where you get your data from, you're going to come up with a dysfunctional thesis at the end. And so until they start actually doing some work, like, I mean, the White Oak Pastures is one. There's another one called the Marin County Project. That was in California, Marin County. You may be familiar with that. That was that was another one. The folks who've done the documentary, what's it called? It's slipping my mind. Soil. Kiss the Ground.
I haven't seen that.
Yeah. So the Kiss the Ground documentary digs into this very, very nicely, and shows exactly what I'm talking about.
I want to mention this guy. I did Frank Mo. He's a professor at UC Davis. And I did an interview with him a couple of years ago, and we're printing it in the upcoming issue of Peace Magazine, because I kept thinking over the last couple of years, I really should share this, because he is a mainstream scientist, but, and his arguments halfway fit yours and sort of halfway don't, because he justifies feedlots finishing animals in feedlots and so on, and he does not advocate all of the things that savories people do, or that I think, as far as I know, everything you've said so far is compatible with the holistic management approach. Is that right? Or do you have any differences there?
Yeah, no. Alan Savory is he is a guru for me, a mentor. I don't know a single thing that I would disagree with him on management grazing. He's as good as they come, and he's the one that many of us follow and have verified his findings. Look, here's the thing you have to understand. 500 years ago, there was way more animal weight on the planet. So if we take all of today's humans and all of today's animals and we add up their weight, there was more weight on the planet 500 years ago of animal weight on the planet than there is today. So if animals are the problem, why didn't we all turn into crispy critters 300 years ago? In fact, here's the one that's really fascinating to me. Even in the United States, where we have all these factory farms and all this, intensive agriculture, we do not have more pounds of animals in the United States today than we did in 1900. Why? Because in 1900, more than 1/3 of all the animal weight was draft power. Oxen, horses, mules. And so as tractors replaced all that draft power, we were able to take that animal weight and grow chickens and pigs and and other things with it. But the animal weight has stayed basically the same. It's no different than it was back then.
Mittloner is his name. It finally came back to me. He said also some of the same things, that we don't have more. That in fact, for example, the amount of milk that a cow can produce now is so much greater that you can do it. You can do the job with fewer cows, and so on. The same with the beef production. You can produce same amount of meat with fewer cows, if you know how to manage it. But his management system is not completely compatible with yours, because he does believe in things like finishing them in feedlots and so on. He does have some very interesting points, so I'll send you the, if you will. I wish I'd done this before so we could talk about his ideas in comparison to yours. I wish people would hurry up and actually produce really hard evidence that good farming of the kind you're proposing, both the production of plants by perennials and the meat production, that can be really adequate to sequester the amount of carbon that we need to do. If we get some more proof of that, then I think the conversation will change, because as of now, the only people I hear talking in the general public discourse are people who say the main thing that we need to do, and I've heard real scientists say the most important thing that we can do for the sake of global warming is stop eating meat. And I have trouble with that.
well, again, when you look at the way meat is produced, I agree with that completely. I agree that the way orthodox meat is produced is completely egregious, and that's where I would disagree dramatically with Frank on his industrial solution to the problem, and on his speeding up solution to the problem. He is taking a fairly mechanistic approach to the problem. I'm taking a fundamentally biological approach to the problem. So I'm not saying let's speed up how fast a cow can eat. I'm saying let's let that cow fully fill her cowness niche, her herbivorous niche, in the environment, and that means not growing so fast, but actually growing on perennials that actually pump this energy back into the soil and sequester the carbon. That's what I would suggest. And so we would certainly disagree there. But there are other things. I mean, we just a couple of years ago we finished collaborating with the Smithsonian on a 2-year working landscape study where they measured several benchmarks. One was soil carbon. One was species of birds. One was invasive species. One was pollinators. And they took these metrics and they measured these, like there were 30 sites in Virginia. And our farm was the only one that they found all 8 bumblebee varieties known to exist in Virginia. And so our pasture mosaic, by moving these animals, by mimicking the way the bison moved around the landscape, we don't have wolves to move them, but we do have electric fence, and so we use electric fence as our predator, and move the animals around the landscape. By doing that, we get a mosaic. We don't get a large, overgrazed field. We get a mosaic of grass that's in various stages. And if you're a savory fan, you know all about this whole, the way the grass grows faster, slower, and goes to seed and all that. But this mosaic offers something in blossom, in bloom all the time. And so you get a flush, a huge increase in pollinators, because they always have something to eat in this kind of system. And so there are all sorts of ancillary benefits from a perennially based, biomimicked type of system, as opposed to anything else. And so
now the thing that you also excited me a little while ago talking about methanotropic bacteria, because I've heard of such things. I know that they're doing research on it and so on, but I didn't know anything about how they live best under perennials. And that is new to me, because it makes a huge difference if you talk that way. One of the things that has always interested me, do you know anything about the Zimovs in Siberia and their Pleistocene Park, that idea? Have you heard of them?
Yes, I'm a little bit aware of that. Not as aware certainly as you are, but you're talking about where they're finding all of these herbivores and trying in tundra, basically in tundra, and trying to recreate the idea of an herbivorous landscape in what we would consider a tundra, and what that must have looked like, a long time ago.
Well, what they find, they go through this permafrost and it's just chock full of bones of huge animals, this megafauna that lived in the Pleistocene period. They were bigger animals than we have much today. Certainly the woolly mammoths were. But at any rate, they find all these things. And so the Zimofs argue that it was because of these big animals that they keep the soil cold, that by not kicking aside the snow in the winter so they can eat the frozen grass underneath, they keep the temperature of the soil, and then they pack it down by stomping on the snow and so on. So they have this large park that they've fenced out, and they're filling it with huge animals. Now, they don't talk about how they're doing it, but certainly they are able to show that they are actually keeping the soil in that park a degree or two colder than it would have been outside the park. So these animals are doing the job. But what I'm wondering is, when you look at the history of the Pleistocene period, and you think of this stupendous number of huge animals that populated the far north, the Arctic. And then I thought, well, how come the methane levels were not extraordinary in that period? Because as far as I know, the ice cores, don't show any such remarkable things. Well, one of the things I've often wondered was maybe methanotropic bacteria explains it, but I haven't heard anybody say that before. And if you could show that, I think it's really a good question. Now, last week I talked to, I don't have this on a recording, but I did talk to a woman who's a specialist in water purification. And I asked her about methanotropic bacteria and whether they would live in the Arctic, for example. Could we put them in the water and increase the amount of those things so that they would consume the amount of methane being emitted from the bottom of the Arctic Ocean? And she said, well, people are working on that, but I haven't heard anybody say that that's feasible. But it sounds to me as if maybe one of the things you want to do is repopulate the Arctic with big animals like bison or whatever, and then also put a lot of dirt with methanotropic bacteria in it to encourage them. What do you think?
Well, what I think is that the ability of the ecosystem to respond redemptively in a healing fashion to excellent management is beyond our comprehension. And we have watched it here on our farm. We have watched the ecology completely change. I mean, as a little child, I remember, we couldn't support 10 cows. Now we support 100 on the same ground, and the fertility is off the charts. I'm not saying that to brag. I'm giving humble homage to a fantastic design that worked, and it's my mandate to discover what those secrets of prehistoric abundance were. When, as you mentioned, when there were these massive numbers of megafauna. We know that in Australia, they had 9-foot tall wombats. We know that here in North America, they've discovered beavers as big as a Volkswagen automobile, a VW Bug. I mean, that's a big beaver, and so this stuff was here. Interestingly, you're mentioning the soil temperature. you can take infrared. I've seen these where they've mapped. They've used satellites to take infrared photography of farmland,
Mhm.
and the difference in soil temperature between a well managed, we'll just call it a savory type, okay, a savory type operation, or one like ours. The difference in soil temperature is remarkable compared to one that's either overgrazed or growing soybeans or corn or whatever. And it shows up as various shades of green to red, green being cooler, red being hotter. And you can literally draw the boundaries. You can take a farm like ours and just draw the fence lines. It's as clear. It's right on the fence line. The difference in the infrared temperature of the landscape. And then when you couple that, let's couple that with one more thing. If you're familiar at all with Walter Yenny, he is the Australian guru of climate change, and his whole position is that the greenhouse gas emissions is barking up the wrong tree. That the problem is vegetation emitting bacteria. In the radiator of the planet is vapor condensation. Vapor condensation is what regulates the planet's temperature. But water vapor cannot condense on itself. It needs a little nucleus of bacteria on which to condense. It can't just condense by itself.
Well, now, wait a minute. Because you're coming into an area that I know a little bit about because I've been interested in clouds. But I understood that they need an aerosol particle to condense around, and I've heard that aerosols are anything except water. Any particle, dust, or almost anything you can think of is an aerosol. It's a tiny particle, except water. That's not considered an aerosol. Okay. Now, I did not hear, and I'm very interested in hearing, that a bacterium could be enough to be the nucleus for a new droplet of water. Is that what you're saying? That all you need, that a bacterium is in effect this aerosol?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. That's exactly what I'm saying. And Walter Yenny is an eminent scientist. He spoke. I mean, he is the global guru on this
Please
idea.
tell me how to spell his last name, because I want to look this up.
Yes, Jenne. Jenne. He pronounces it Yenny.
Okay.
But Walter is his first name. Walter Yenny. So his bottom line is that the reason the planet can't cool off is because we don't have enough vegetation due to tillage, overgrazing, urbanization, but we don't have enough vegetation to exude this bacterial canopy, so that the water droplets can condense on it. And so if you increase the vegetation, then you give something a place to condense, and that is why desertification tends to expand. It gets worse and worse and worse because when there's no vegetation, then there's no clouds, no rain, and you get desertification. And it's why in the heavily vegetated parts of the world, we're getting more severe weather, supposedly, because the planet is trying to balance out its temperature. And so since it can't get droplets, so it can't form clouds over here, it forms clouds over here where the vegetation is. And so again, you get an additional amount of cloud formation over the vegetated areas and the non-vegetated. And so the kind of system that when you go to a perennial system, You don't have open soil. You don't have bare soil, and you have. And if you're doing the kind of grazing that we've described, where where the animals, well, we call it, you'll like this, we call it mob stocking, herbivorous, solar conversion, lignified carbon sequestration. So when I've practiced that in front of a mirror. So when you do that kind of vegetative leverage, you simply get way more of this bacteria, exuding off the vegetation. Which
that's what I want you to explain. How do plants exude bacteria? This is again something you're telling me, very interesting. I hadn't heard that before. That there are more bacteria in the air around vegetation. Right?
Yes. That is exactly correct. Well, because plants produce bacteria and the air doesn't, so you've got to have plants. Now, again, I am not the I'm not the authority on this. I am quoting Walter Yenny, who is the authority, and but I can it makes sense to me. You may well know about experiments where they've gone into, for example, deserts. I know one was done in the Rajputana Desert in India by a meteorology team from the University of Wisconsin, where they simply fenced out several square miles of the desert, and very quickly, and they just fenced out the nomads, all the sheep and the cattle and everything that were overgrazing it. And in very short time, I mean, I'm talking about fewer than 5 years, vegetation began growing. And when the vegetation began growing, they started getting cloud formation. Literally in 5 to 6 or 7 years, this team saw dramatic changes in rain. In a whatever 5 or 6 square mile area. So it wasn't a backyard situation. It was several square miles, but still it was a tiny portion of this desert that they focused on, simply to see what if we can, if we fence out the overgrazing and allow the plants to get some leaves on them, what happens? And they saw a dramatic change in the cloud formation and rainfall in that area.
Now here you've said something again. Well, finish. Go ahead. Sorry.
The work of Jeff Lawton. He's a permaculture teacher in Australia and has worked a lot in Lebanon and the very arid areas of the Middle East. And he has shown that just with not a whole lot of effort, you can capture more water, grow more vegetation, have more leaves, and then better cloud formation on an extremely small area. A couple of square miles, which is a very small area. When you're looking at a whole landmass.
Well, that's where I was about to interrupt you, because you said something that triggered to me. I've had several interviews with people about Miyawaki forestry, and that is a kind where they plant a whole bunch of trees close together, like four or five trees per square meter, and they're different heights, canopy heights, and so on, and they say that you water them and weed them for about 3 years, and after that you couldn't, if you wanted to, because they're so thick that you couldn't even get in there, and you don't need to. Now, these little forests are so small, they're like the size of a tennis court or something even smaller. You can run them along strips along highways and so on. So what I couldn't understand is how a little patch of forestry with very dense vegetation could possibly generate its own liquid, its own water, that you don't have to water them anymore. Is that what you're saying, that somehow how do they do it? I wondered how maybe you're
Now,
explaining that.
well, I don't have the full explanation, but I can tell you that in extremely dry areas like this, the plants like that dense vegetation
Mhm.
attracts dew, and the dew itself becomes almost like rain as it drops off the leaves. Think about it. Think about a tin roof, of a house, and in the summer and it's hot, but in the morning the water literally runs off of the roof,
Really? Okay.
is condensed, and so that's the kind of thing. Now Jeff Lawton, in his work with permaculture, he's doing things like swales and little water, things. I mean, in Israel, when Israel began planting reforesting so many of theirs, they literally, I was over there in Israel and saw a guy that where he's planting these trees, and he simply takes a mattock or a shovel, and he simply makes a little funnel with a little dam on the downside of the tree. And he told me that little, whatever, 1 meter wide, whatever, reception funnel, just a little bit of earthworks, 4 or 5 inches, enough to where there is surface runoff to funnel that into the tree, made the equivalent of tripling the amount of moisture that tree got. See, worldwide, 1/3 of all raindrops run off the surface because they either come too fast or too much at one time.
Mhm.
And so they overrun the porosity of the soil. And so 1/3 of all raindrops fall off. So even if you're in a very dry area of whatever 6 inches of rainfall a year, 2 of those inches are going to run off. You know what? If you've been down to Albuquerque, New Mexico, and as you drive along the interstate, every mile there's this big dry riverbed, an arroyo, I think they call them a lot. And you'll see, dune buggies and sand rails and go-karts and stuff running up and down. And you ask your host or hostess, you say, what is that? Well, they'll tell you 10 days in the year, that whole thing is running bank to bank full of muddy water.
Mhm.
And so if we actually trap that water, this is what the Australian PA Yeomans was all about back in the 1950s, when Yeomans invented the Keyline program and wrote Water for Every Farm, which is an iconic book now in agriculture. He said the goal of every farmer should be to never allow surface runoff, to hold those raindrops as high on the landscape as possible for as long as possible, so that you get the advantage of that slow gravitational move of the water down, as opposed to fast move of the water. And
I agree. I'm impressed, and I believe every word of it. And we got to stop. And I want you to come back because you're a fount of wisdom. I really have learned so much already in this 1 hour that I want you to come back and do it again with some more folks that also know what questions to ask you. Okay.
Sure.
Thank you. It's been
thank
wonderful.
you very much.
All right. Carry on. What you're doing is wonderful. I bless you. Thank you.
You
Bye-bye.
too. Bye now.
Project Save the World produces these forums, and this is episode 569. You can watch them or listen to them as audio podcasts on our website, tosavetheworld.ca. People share information there about 6 global issues. To find a particular talk show, enter its title or episode number in the search bar, or the name of one of the guest speakers. Project Save the World also produces a quarterly online publication, Peace Magazine. You can subscribe for $20 Canadian per year. Just go to pressreader.com on your browser, and in the search bar, enter the word peace. You'll see buttons to click to subscribe.